Thanks for inviting me along today. I'm Murray Maybery. I'm a professor in psychological science at UWA. But first I want to start by acknowledging the Whadjuk Noongar people, who are the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting. The Whadjuk Noongar remain the spiritual and cultural custodians of their land and continue to practice their values, language, beliefs and knowledge. Okay, I'll start right at the beginning. I was brought up on a farm in Western Victoria, about 5 hours drive from Melbourne. No one in my family had finished high school, I don't think. So there was no expectations on me in any regard academically. And fortunately, I had an older brother who was coming home to work on the farm. So it wasn't expected that I'd become a farmer. So basically I sort of stumbled on through school. I had to change schools after year 10 to go to another school that offered years 11 and 12. And at the end of year 12, a friend was applying to go to university and I had no idea what I was going to do. I don't think I'd talked to anyone about careers at any stage. So I just followed along and applied to universities, and I was lucky enough to receive a scholarship that covered a half of my college fees at the University of Melbourne. So that's where I enrolled. And when I was enrolling in a standard Bachelor of Science, and I'd chosen 3 science subjects. And I was looking around trying to avoid doing chemistry, and there was this subject, psychology, which I'd heard nothing about. So based on 2 sentences in the handbook, I enrolled in psychology. I couldn't even spell psychology for the first week. So I knew absolutely nothing about the area. I don't think I'd ever met a psychologist. So then in my undergraduate studies, I was a very poor student, but I did have peaks in developmental psychology and cognitive psychology, and my honours project was on cognitive development. After I finished honours, again I hadn't really thought about any career at all. It seems a bit bizarre that I'd go through a whole degree and not be thinking about what I'm going to do afterwards. But I finished honours, and the logical thing to do seemed to be delaying making any decision, so I went off on a student bus tour of New Zealand, and that's where I met Denise, who then became my wife. And Denise was studying at University of Queensland, and when she went back home she sent me an ad for a research assistant job at UQ. And this was working with Graham Halford, a developmental psychologist. And so that's how I started an academic career, working for Graham as an RA. After a year or 2 of working for him, I decided to enrol in a PhD, and I enrolled in one on adult cognition in an area that was vaguely related to Graham's work, but it was so far removed that I had complete control over the project. I designed all the studies and basically wrote up the thesis quite independently of Graham. Then it took me a fair while to complete my PhD part-time. I was still working for Graham. And towards the end of my PhD, I started teaching statistics, and that was what led me to get a job here at UWA, initially lecturing in a 3rd-year statistics unit. I gradually graduated over to teaching cognition and development, and my early research here was on working memory, and I was lucky enough to start up a collaboration with a research group at Cardiff University headed by Dylan Jones, and that then led on to several successful ARC grants on working memory. After about 10 years, a student came along to me wanting to do an honours project on autism, and she was interested in applying Graham Halford's theory of cognitive development to autism. So that's how I started working on autism, and shortly after I was invited to join Joachim Hollmeyer, who was in psychiatry here, and Dorothy Bishop, who were successful in getting an NHMRC grant application on autism. So that started me off working on autism, and I've been lucky enough to have federal funding of my autism research through until now. In the autism space, I primarily investigated the autism continuum. So our early work was on cognition in the first degree relatives of children with autism. More recently, I've been investigating face masculinization in relation to autism. So young autistic children have a more masculinized face than their non-autistic counterparts. And we've also demonstrated that the brothers and sisters of autistic children also have more masculinized face structure, as do their parents. And it's argued that this is related to early exposure to androgens in utero when the face and the brain are developing in concert. So that probably summarises the main parts of my journey through research.